Our next speaker is Marcus Ransom. Marcus is an Apple Solutions Architect at CompuNow in Australia, working across enterprise and educational environments. Understanding the changing Apple ecosystem and the way people use their technology motivates him to improve the way Apple devices are supported and perceived in the wider IT environment. Marcus is co-host of the MacAdmin's podcast and helps coordinate X-World, Every World, the longest running Apple device management conference. And I had the question for you, Marcus, the all-important question of life, the universe, and everything. Or should we say, what was your favorite Mac?
Well, my answer to that one, of course, was my favorite Mac is Ian McLagan from the Small Faces. But then I realized you were probably asking something entirely different. So the real answer is it was a hard one. Which is your favorite child? As I said, my favorite was the Bondi Blue iMac. As a reformed industrial designer, that was a real moment for me. That great design, not just good design or just design, was an extremely important part of a great product. So, would Apple have been saved if the first iMac had all of the functionality, was an all-in-one, but it was just another beige box? I don't think so. I think that really showed that the essence of the machine could be outwardly facing as well as inwardly facing as well. So despite the fact that maybe they're not quite as revolutionary anymore, I think as a point in time, that was a real sort of a real keystone for Apple.
And unfortunately, I don't have a Bondi Blue Mac anymore. That was one of the ones I had to get rid of under pain of execution from my wife.
but I think that's one of the ones where everybody knows what it looks like, and for me, that's part of it. When you say it, everybody remembers it, which is good.
Yes, indeed. So Marcus has a tape presentation, so I will get it going here. Do you have anything you want to intro it with?
No, look, I think I put everything in there. Fortunately, this was recorded before my fortunately just a cold, as the test result yesterday proved. So the audio might be a bit better, and pre-recording also makes things a lot easier in the context of everything Kelly described in the previous session. So I hope you enjoy it. I'll be around for Q&A if anybody's got any questions afterwards. But yeah, thanks for an awesome conference, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I'm presenting and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. Hi everyone, I'm Marcus Ransom. I'm an Apple Solutions Architect at CompuNow here in Melbourne, Australia, and I've been managing Apple devices for over 2 decades. Some of you may recognise me as one of the hosts of the MacAdmin's podcast, and I'm also one of the organisers of Australia's X-World Conference and our online version, Every World. So people have a long and rich history of storytelling through songs. Cautionary tales that our future generations of MacAdmins are going to be singing about the lessons we learned from Covid-19 and how we dealt with the ensuing global pandemic, the lockdowns, and the changes to the way we conduct our craft. These are some of the experiences that I've witnessed, and I'm sure there are more. Some of these may still have additional transformations to make, as we definitely aren't through this challenge by any stretch. So the traditional model of security was to keep all of the important and privileged systems on the protected network and only let people access it from there. You make their complex requirements to get on the Wi-Fi and even more complex systems to ensure someone can't just plug into a random Ethernet port, right? Or maybe you have great physical security to control who has access to the building. For those rare occasions where someone has a good business case to have access to these systems off-site, we have a thoroughly robust, up-to-date and supported on all current operating system VPN. Right? Has that been your experience? So what happens when the world decides to send everyone home so they don't get sick? So we saw VPNs that had capacity planning around less than 1% of the users being connected, licensing that reflected similar numbers of concurrent users, outdated VPNs that weren't compatible with current versions of macOS. VPNs that were designed around the odd user needing to connect when they're attending a conference or dealing with unexpected after-hours issues from home. Not for the whole workforce to be out of the office. Full tunnel VPNs where all traffic is sent across the encrypted pipe to the corporate network and then out their gateway are just exacerbated issues. Always on VPNs, which meant that there was simply no way of getting around these issues. Communication to users as to where the bottlenecks are and why. We had end users complaining that they'd spent a lot of money to get their home internet connection upgraded to try and improve their experience, only to find that their always-on VPN was set to throttle bandwidth to ensure that everyone was at least able to get some access. We had users who didn't understand that their ADSL1 connection at home was meaning that it didn't really matter how bad the VPN was, they weren't getting that 5GB file anytime soon. So what did we learn from this? So the first lesson is upgrade your freaking VPN. If this is a part of your security posture, then it needs to be secure. Make sure there's a fit-for-purpose solution for all of the operating systems your organization uses, not just the majority. Now, this may mean you need multiple VPN solutions. But you also need to design your security posture around what you need to protect and where. So consider split tunnel VPN so users can go directly out to content that's outside of your network rather than having to get back in to access it. So we've discussed the idea of perimeter security and how many issues we saw with VPNs. Now, the not unrealistic assumption that most people were going to be working from the office leads to organizations keeping most of their systems and data on the local network. Not being able to easily connect to the VPN or not having a great experience even when they were connected to the VPN was challenging. So what systems were users trying to get back into the network to access? Mail servers on the local network, we remember those, don't we? Well, we still see a few of those kicking around, but the bigger issue is companies that hadn't moved to more modern cloud-based collaboration suites. When all of their data was stored on-prem, it created bottlenecks, and that led to staff using less than secure ways of sharing files. So when we're talking about your standard Word and Excel files, that's one kind of issue. But what about larger files? We started getting calls from users who were having trouble working off SMB shares mounted over a VPN, trying to access linked assets from a shared InDesign file. So do you want to guess what that experience was like? Now, deadlines still needed to be met, and the frustration the users were feeling was really clear. We heard amazing feats that digital production studios performed, quickly building portable SANs so production suites could be taken home and work could continue. Couriers were driving disk arrays between houses, so necessity really is the mother of invention. Companies, or even sometimes just users, would rapidly spin up cloud collaboration or storage tools to allow them to move data around. Then it became a case of tracking all of the let's just get this to work decisions and designing proper, robust solutions that allow this to happen in safe and secure ways. And that's going to be ongoing. So our lesson here is to embrace modern, secure cloud collaboration suites and to pick cloud services that match the particular use case. Now, there may not be a one SaaS to rule them all solution. Different teams may prefer or require different tools. So the most important issue we faced with traditional on-prem environments is when their MDM wasn't externally available. Now, we always enforce an always-on VPN, or our security posture mandates that important systems like that are protected, really expose their weaknesses. Surely when a device is outside of your protected network is when you most need visibility of what's happening on that device and the ability to take action if something isn't right. So we've discussed the issues with VPNs, but imagine what it's like trying to manage not just the data users are trying to work with, but the huge amount of bandwidth required for installing and updating software. We had constant calls about the Macs are clogging the VPN every time they try to patch their applications. This is because the only package distribution point this organization had was on-prem, and it was only available over the VPN. So there were plenty of situations where the mitigation that was put in place to improve general connectivity over the VPN had a negative impact on Apple updates. And with the recently published vulnerabilities, ensuring that all of the offsite machines are fully patched posed a whole bunch of issues. If the device can only contact the MDM when it's on the VPN, but you specifically don't want it trying to update over the VPN for bandwidth issues, or it simply can't update then due to firewall configurations, then ensuring your fleet isn't vulnerable to exploits is tough. Now, it's difficult enough to force Apple software updates under the best conditions, but this kind of makes it even more messy. Now, one statistic that's impressed me no end with our customers is that we've managed to significantly reduce the number of on-prem MDM servers we manage. I can count them on one hand now, whereas several years ago they were in the hundreds. Now, many had started this transformation long before COVID hit us, but there were several notable holdouts who we'd resolved ourselves to always being on-prem and only available over the VPN. Now they're cloud hosted and externally available, and the users are benefiting enormously from this. Not just from the improved access, but from having their devices far more easily able to be secured. So the lesson here is, don't listen to Mick Jagger. Make sure your MDM is in the cloud or at least available everywhere. So the issues with identity fell into two main buckets. We've got device identity and then we've got user identity. So let's speak about device identity first. So we all know that binding is bad and you should feel bad, but my discussions with organisations who are still adamant they need to bind their Macs always start with the old, what are we trying to achieve? And when we break down their requirements, pretty much everything can be achieved through more modern means, such as certificate proxies, deploying via MDM, enrollment customization, and then there's our very good friends Nomad, we've got Jamf Connect, we've got Jump Cloud, and the new kid on the block, Credentia. Even the creators of Active Directory, our good friends at Microsoft, provide us with a host of tools that allow us to do things in a more modern way. Having our devices relying on centralized identity management solutions really isn't a bad thing. In fact, it's a really important part of your security posture. Binding to AD is not. Trying to provision or rebuild devices when the user's not able to get back into the office was a nightmare. Dealing with devices that had lost trust of their machine record and all the ensuing issues that were difficult to resolve when you couldn't just ask them to pop down to the service desk. Trying to deploy or renew device certificates across a VPN when entirely different firewall rules are being applied over that connection, and the expectation from infrastructure teams that this is a Mac issue and it needs to somehow be resolved on the device. Deploying devices to new starters or device refreshes that require first login for a mobile account to be on-prem. How does that work if the user's at home or maybe not even in the same country? How do we get the user to the point where they can use the VPN if the only way to set up the trust certs is to be on the protected network, which in this case would be over the VPN? For devices enrolled in MDM, that gives us varying degrees of trust based on how we've enrolled it. And it also gives us ongoing visibility of the status of the device. Modern conditional access models are a far better way of dealing with device trust than binding to AD. The binding method works on the assumption that a device trusted once is always to be trusted. And this surely shouldn't be the case for a device that's gone outside of the office and it's being used who knows where and by who knows who. Being able to set different levels of trust based on if the device is corporate owned and managed device, or if it's just the person's own shiny 27-inch iMac that they prefer using to check their email when they're working from home. Making sure you're in the right mindset before implementing conditional access is always important. Some of the challenges we faced during lockdown accelerated implementations were the chicken and egg conundrum of making sure your conditional policies allowed a device to get into an approved state without needing authentication that could only take place on an already approved device. So there were a couple of long Zoom-conducted whiteboard sessions to identify where things were getting tripped up, but we got there in the end. Now, user identity is a whole other story. Securing access with a username and password that's potentially written on a post-it that's stored in the pocket of the laptop bag, that's been taken to the park for a bit of work during a rare break outside for fresh air. And then there's punching holes through your firewall, so all of your cloud services can access directory information. Now that's never fun, and it's understandably difficult to get security teams on board. So it's better to do this once with a cloud IDP or broker than again and again for each service. Dealing with mandated regular AD password changes when you can only contact the domain controller over the VPN, Or maybe the firewall rules on the VPN have changed and it turns out the password change mechanism you've been using doesn't actually work anymore. Making sure the file vault password is properly rotated when the AD password has changed, and users getting themselves locked out of machines trying to jump through the hoops that these outdated legacy ways of managing user identity require. These are all challenges we help people deal with. The sort of challenges we've always dealt with, just on a scale that was causing much greater business impact. Fortunately, as well as migrating email onto cloud services, many organizations are either actively using or at least dipping their toes in using modern cloud-based identity providers or brokers. How much easier is it to configure an application for a service in Azure or Okta than to build yet another LDAP proxy server and try to get the LDAP-S certificates working properly? How much more secure is it when we enable multi-factor authentication so the risk of shared credentials is massively reduced? The frustration of needing to use another device to approve, that's quickly forgotten when you no longer need to change your password every 180, 90, 60, even 30 days. As more applications, services, and yes, even operating systems allow us to integrate cloud-based identity, the ability to provide a secure, efficient mobile user experience is so much more straightforward. So the lesson we learned here is that once we're properly integrated with a good cloud identity provider, the reasons for the perimeter-based security model we discussed earlier have mostly vanished. We're able to move almost all of the services we need into the cloud or into SaaS platforms, and many of the technical hoops we've had to jump through are gone. So new hires and device refreshes didn't stop because we went into lockdown. And when your device provisioning workflows rely on a device being set up on campus, then this was likely to become a problem. Maybe you were fortunate enough that the local rules allowed essential staff to be on site to provision machines. Maybe new starters were able to get dispensation to go into the office to pick up equipment. But maybe things were so bad where you were that this wasn't considered essential. The idea of zero-touch enrollment all of a sudden made sense for an entirely different reason. We saw staff basements or garages get turned into the new corporate deployment hub. Devices that get shipped to them by the vendor and then prepped to be shipped out to end users. Now, we already offer this as a service for many of our customers, and we saw a huge uptake in this service as we were fortunate enough to be able to keep operating in our deployment warehouse as an essential service. Even if it's just making sure a device is running the latest OS and it's properly packed with all of its accessories before it gets shipped to the end user. We saw some pretty ingenious workflows where deployment teams would coordinate resetting the user's credentials with them so they could provision a machine and then get it couriered out to the user without them being present to do first mobile account logins on site. But we also saw a lot of folks start looking at what cloud identity solutions would mean in terms of deployment. Companies who'd been resistant to the idea of zero-touch deployment for so long all of a sudden made it a priority. Of course, it helped if their MDM was already externally facing, they weren't binding to AD, and they could deploy packages easily off-site. The idea of a new machine going out with all of the software installed suddenly didn't seem so important when it involves annihilating someone's home network or resulting in several days extra delivery time. The lesson here is that a simple, fast, agile deployment workflow is what we should be aiming for. Being able to quickly get someone up and running with a new or rebuilt asset regardless of where in the world they happen to be. So most of the issues we saw with systems were related to almost the entire workforce going home. As well as accessing systems, there were a raft of other issues that this created. So there's hardware. Do users even have a desk at home? Is the dining table an OHS compliant workspace? My Windows colleagues even had to deal with the issue of desktops going home, only to realise they didn't have Wi-Fi capability, and not everyone's able to plug into their home network using Ethernet cables. The challenges of having kids learning from home while others are trying to work, trying to maintain a sense of professionalism when there's music lessons going on in the next room, or someone was mid-meltdown because they were having a bad day, and that wasn't always a kid having the meltdown. Someone said to me, imagine lockdown but being in the worst sharehouse you ever lived in. I lived in some frightening sharehouses in my younger days, and the thought of being locked in and trying to work there sends shivers down my spine. That was pretty close to the experience for many people. If you've ever a job where you're spending the majority of your time in the office, especially if breakfast, lunch and dinner were catered, Chances are, especially if you're in the inner city and you didn't have a lot of space at home, you might not have even bothered to learn how to cook. There were home networks that were fine if you were uploading large files to AWS at night that maybe weren't quite so good in the daytime when there were 3 or 4 video calls going on for remote learning or working, and the same was happening right across your whole suburb. The progress bar crawls a lot slower. Our managed support contracts had to change rapidly to allow for troubleshooting home network issues. Patient phone support staff who were able to calmly talk someone through working out where their modem might be and restarting it to fix all the things. Or even just to explain that 3 other family members watching 4K Netflix streams was likely to be having an impact on their video calls. Our sense of what working from home was like changed very quickly. Getting to meet pets, often unexpectedly, was always good. Pausing the business conversations because someone needed to help solve an algebra problem. Even having the rest of the meeting participants join in to try and solve it together. Remembering that we are people first, and we work to live, and that we're entirely capable of doing our jobs really well, even if we are making lunch for our family with the camera turned off. Also being fine with the fact that sometimes we aren't able to do our jobs really well because it's a global pandemic and we're scared our loved ones are going to get sick or not be able to pay the bills. The introverts loved not having to go into the office and deal with an open plan environment. The extroverts would take over every Zoom call the same way they took control of physical meeting rooms. Conferences were cancelled or went online like Mac Deployment has. We missed catching up with friends in the hallway track, but we found new ways of doing it online. That worked well for existing friends, but it's still very socially isolating for someone who doesn't already know anybody. There were some intriguing concepts thrown around to deal with people working from home. Requests like, can we track what people are doing on their computers during work hours? Now, do you think the same people who might not be working hard at home were able to do nothing even when they were in the office? They probably were. How do we make sure people aren't taking too many breaks? Or maybe just focus on output rather than hours? If the work's getting done, does it really matter that your team has taken some additional time to make sure their kids are set up for home learning or answered the door when the Amazon delivery came? Also maybe remember that it's a global pandemic, and there was also a bit of doom scrolling happening. Ensuring your team's mental health is being considered, after all, is a really important KPI. There are times when pajamas are perfectly appropriate business attire. There are also plenty of times when they're not. The most hilarious misguided attempt I witnessed during lockdown was when my daughter's primary school decided to have an all-school assembly over WebEx. Now, this is a platform that's set up for that sort of challenge. All-hands events with way more than the 1,100 staff and students who were hoping to connect that day. Except when the principal decided to tell everyone to turn their microphones on because they were going to sing the national anthem together, the feedback and loop delays were exacerbated by everyone bursting out laughing, not to mention the fact that no one had thought to disable remote screen sharing, and the Year 1 students were taking advantage and were sharing what they'd been working on with the rest of the school. The great thing was, rather than heads rolling, it was a reset that the frustrated teachers, the students, and us parents needed. I have to say, even as a parent observing, I learnt a lot about how to prepare for a video call that day. So we all got better at conducting ourselves remotely, and hopefully businesses started to understand that working from home wasn't an excuse, but it was an opportunity. How did we go at maintaining a work-life balance when work and life were in the same place? Listening to friends who were already working remotely was an enormous help. But keeping in mind that there's a stark difference between working from home because you choose to and working from home because you might get sick if you leave the house. I know I found I was struggling to draw a line between work and life, and it required significant self-discipline to switch off and not feel like I shouldn't be watching a movie at night with the family. Trying to remember to queue messages up to be sent in the morning so others didn't feel compelled to respond at whatever hour it was, or remembering to step up and walk away from the desk regularly, even if it's just so you can go for a walk around the block. Realizing just how many steps you did in a normal day, just going about your routine, and how fewer you take when it's walking from the bedroom to the kitchen and your workspace and back again. Making sure you have proper breaks for meals, despite the joys of not having to navigate peak hour traffic, parking, multiple public transport connections, or waiting for an elevator. For those of us who hadn't already gone down the rabbit hole, we got to get excited about microphones, webcams, and lighting, which was once just the realm of social media influencers, but now something we can all get excited about. So, working remotely is nothing like working in the office. We learned that there are a bunch of things that are harder, but if you weigh that up against the benefits, it might just work for you, even if it's not every day. So, what does returning to the office look like? Are we even close to returning to the office? As the infection numbers reduce or the vaccinations increase, some of us were able to go back into the office, maybe just for some of the time. Some of us aren't there yet and are closely following those who have so they can see how it goes. Some of us opened up and had to lock back down again, like we are here in Melbourne. No amount of planning could prevent some unexpected issues when we turn our upturned world back up the right way again. So if we're coming back part of the time, what happens with all the equipment we took home? How do we deal with needing monitors, keyboards, chairs and the like in multiple locations? If we decide that hot desks are the solution to dealing with a transient part-time office presence, how do we deal with the potential health impact of shared keyboards and mice? Like washing our hands properly, this is an issue that has always existed. And maybe that's just part of how we end up with a global pandemic in the first place. How do we deal with staff who decided to pack up and move somewhere else, where they could afford a better lifestyle? How do we deal with the people who never liked being around other people and were far happier and much more productive at home? My wife Vicky's a secondary teacher, and they noticed that after lockdown, students were sometimes 12 months behind where they should have been developmentally. So how do we help our colleagues and ourselves get back in the swing of working around other people again? What about the people who discovered that they could enjoy sitting down and eating dinner with the whole family for the first time and never wanted to go back to the long commute home? Travelling across town, interstate or internationally for a 1-hour meeting is likely to be a thing of the past now that we're used to conducting meetings online. But how do we get back the thinking time during our commute or travelling between meetings? The exhaustion of a day of back-to-back Zoom meetings is real. Our poor choices for infrastructure come back to haunt us. Companies who have policies that disable or delete AD machine records when a device hasn't contacted the domain controller in 3 or 6 months discovered that nobody's machine-based Wi-Fi works when they come back into the office. Although, how easy was it to replace or renew radius certificates when pretty much everyone was off-site? Our rapidly implemented projects to move everything to the cloud may require some tuning when a large number of users are now inside the network trying to get out. Getting to meet the new starters you developed a great relationship with online and discovering they were tall or short or somehow different from how you perceived them to be on the other side of a screen. Mourn the loss of cafes, restaurants and bars that didn't survive the complete lack of customers while you all worked from home. Especially the impact of this on the owners and the staff that served you, and feel grateful that you weren't working in an industry that vanished overnight. Maybe your company realised that a huge campus in an expensive area wasn't going to be sustainable in the after times, and now has smaller co-working spaces in different locations. Support the businesses that are trying to make a go of it around where your office is now. We all learned that we are all coming back as different people in some way from the way we were when we went into lockdown. Being perceptive of how these changes have impacted systems, but most importantly, people, is the key to a successful reintegration. So the light's at the end of the tunnel, closer for some than it is for others, but there is hope. How do we make lemonade out of the sour, rotten lemon that COVID-19 has been for everyone? Expensive and cumbersome digital transformation projects with highly paid consultants weren't able to lead organisations into modern mobile workforces in the way that a pandemic has. How can we make the most of it? Our heads are in the clouds, whether it be mail servers, device management, collaboration. The days of on-prem are over, and even some of the most compliance-constrained industries are finding the path forward. There will always be some industries where the old ways of doing things are still valid and legitimate, or just a mandated requirement, but their numbers are dwindling as regulatory bodies become more sophisticated. So this opens up the ability to work or learn or teach from almost anywhere. Not always, but more and more roles are finding that it's appropriate. There is still nothing better than the experience you get from attending in-person training, but the increased amount of well-curated and delivered online coursework allows more people to access what they may not have been able to before. Exciting roles with forward-thinking companies are within reach of anyone, regardless of where they happen to live. We can catch up in person when we need to, but we're able to collaborate online and live better lives wherever makes us happy. So what are the songs you think you will be singing about COVID-19? Are we going to learn some lessons or just go back to the way it was before? Are we going to use the skills we developed and the flexibility we enjoyed over the past year and a bit for our benefit? Or are we going to waste the sacrifices that were made and just pretend it didn't happen? I know one of the things I'm pining for is sitting in a cramped middle row economy seat again on a long haul flight and to put up with dodgy conference Wi-Fi in order to see all of you in person again. As my good friend Tom Bridge says, there will undoubtedly be hugs involved, so prepare yourselves. Thank you so much to everyone involved in putting on Mac Deployment. The organising committee, the other speakers, sponsors, and of course you, the attendees. I'd love to hear what you've learned from your experiences with COVID-19. Feel free to hit me up on the MacAdmin Slack if you want to discuss anything. And I'll see you all soon.
Questions for Tom, or for Marcus, pardon me.
Tom can answer all of my questions, that's fine. One of them I saw was someone was asking what a share house. Now, a share house is a group of people who aren't family, possibly not even friends, just living in the same house. Probably the best way to describe it is to think of the young ones, the comedy. That's probably the best description for share houses. Something you're happy to grow out of and be able to afford to not live in anymore.
Okay.
Kelly has another question. Where can she find more of your playlists?
I'll happily put together some playlists for Kelly. We were also discussing is rather than just using album covers, is my next challenge to try and create an entire conference presentation built entirely from song lyrics. So, maybe next year.
Song lyrics. Ooh. I thought album covers was cool.
Although the challenge is, are you choosing album covers to match the content, or are you choosing content based on album covers?
I'm going to jump in again here with one from the Slack. We've got, did anyone curate the playlist? What's your favorite song from the album covers you showed? There's two separates there, sorry.
Really, see, that's just like asking what my favorite Mac is. Build by the House Martins. That'd be a good one. Yep.